God is. We talked about that last time, and the evidence for God's existence, how God has shown himself in the world around us, and how God has shown himself in Jesus Christ. And now the question comes, but how does one get right with God? How does one find God? How does one reach God? The world is filled with religions, so many different answers to the question of how does one reach God. So today we want to think about the issue of how does one get right with God, and aren't all religions about God? The real key to that question, I believe, hinges on what you do with God and how you understand him. Traditionally, or commonly, people understand God as the supreme being. There's only room for one supreme being. So there is God who is at the top of all things, the creator of all things. And a very attractive idea to a lot of people is what is called the big mountain theory. So God is God, the creator of all that is, the Lord of all that is, and he's on the top of the mountain. So then the reasoning goes, how many ways are there up that mountain? And the answer would be, well, lots. Lots of ways up that mountain. You might have a direct route straight up the side of the mountain, maybe a winding, circuitous route up the side of the mountain. Maybe on the backside you have a very rocky, difficult route. Maybe on the other side there's a very sloping, easy route. There's lots of ways up. Lots of ways up, but ultimately, where do they all end? At one point, at God. And so the reasoning goes that that's how it is with the religions of the world. Lots and lots of religions, but they all end at the same point. They all get you to God. And people say, that makes sense. I like that idea. And honestly, it's a very attractive idea because it would account for the multiple religions in the world, and it would allow them all to be really about the same thing and really all getting the same place. And wouldn't we all feel good to know that we're all going in the same direction, even though it's different routes and different ways of doing it? Maybe you want to drive, you'd rather walk, you want to take the direct route, you want to take a winding route. Doesn't matter, we're all getting there. And it's, like I said, a very attractive, common idea in the world, this big mountain theory. And honestly, a lot of religions seem to work with this idea. Because when you begin to study the world's religions, you begin to realize very quickly that basically all the religions simply are offering a way that a person becomes right with God. Think about it for just a minute. Take Islam, for example. The 5 pillars of Islam: fasting, praying, giving alms. They have their ways of getting right with God. Do the things that are necessary, and you will be right with God. You make your way to God. Hinduism offers multiple ways within that one religion. You have a spiritual route of getting close to God, an intellectual route, a moral route. And there are different ways of doing it, and different Hindus try to achieve it, but they're all doing the same thing. They're working their way up the mountain, working their way to God, doing something. American civil religion, in other words, the religion that most Americans have. Believe in God, go to church, or at least don't talk bad about church, and get involved in the affairs of the country, be nice to your neighbor, vote, support the troops. That's American civil religion. And the idea is, if you do these things, do the right things, then you will obviously be right with God. Work your way up the mountain. It's a very attractive idea, and I would argue it's very wrong. The problem with the big mountain theory is that it's making God part of the system. I'll explain that more in a minute. But really what it's doing is it's making God something that we have created him to be. The greatest thing that is, or the supreme being. And he's the one that sits on the top of the mountain. We're just trying to find our way up to him. Instead of letting God be the center, he seems like he's at the center. Really what's happening is man is becoming the center, because man then is making his decisions about what he thinks is the best way to get to God. And so man starts to make the decisions. In the 19th century, a philosopher named Ludwig Feuerbach had the insight to realize that most religions are operating with a God of their own creation. People simply project onto this idea of what God is, what they think he should be, and what they think a great God would be, and so therefore come to the conclusion that's God, a God of their own making. And Feuerbach was ruthless in saying that's nothing worthwhile. It's simply a God that makes you feel good, a God that resonates with your ideas of what is right. I really believe that's true for most religions. They're making God as they think he should be, not as he has shown himself to be. See, the problem is when we put man at the center, we end up making man the definer of God. So man begins to say, God should be this, or God should be that, and it should be this way to God or that way to God, instead of simply saying, God is, and God has established how things should be. Man is not at the center. God is. And of course, this is a challenge because we want all these religions to be equally valid, because it would make us feel so good if we could all be working together and if we didn't have to, actually say somebody was wrong. But the problem is, a Feuerbach sort of God, a God of my own making, ends up being something of my own creation, and then we're all kind of in this together, making up gods, or making up the God, and making up our ways. But is there any reality in it? It's just what makes us feel good. And there is no reality. The fact of the matter is, there is God. He's real. He exists. And there is then the desire to be right with this God. And religions try to answer that way. But God has shown us there is but one way. More on that next time. What we need to think about now is, why isn't it that all these religions can't all be true? The fact is, they make different claims. They make different claims about God, different claims about the way to be right with God. And many of those claims contradict and conflict with each other. Two conflicting truths can't both be true. Two statements that are in conflict can't both be right. And so you cannot have multiple ways to God and all of them be right. It simply won't work. People today want to be tolerant. It's one of the real demands in our society in America today, is that we are tolerant of all people, tolerant of all faiths, and understanding. And understanding is great, and tolerance and patience are all great things. But just because we're tolerant of other people and understanding of other people doesn't mean that we're all right. There is truth. There is one thing that is right. And even though it might be appealing to say that there are multiple ways and multiple ways to get to God, the reality is that there is only one God. You see, all these different religions with all their different ways really end up creating different gods, different definitions of gods. There is only one God. Anything that is not the true God is an idol, a God of our own making, a God that we have created. The danger of analyzing the different religions and finding a religion that you like is that it's you that's making the decision. You're still in the driver's seat. You're the one making the choice. It's not really legitimate to sit down and say, well, here's what Islam says. I like that or I don't. Here's what Hindus say, or here's what Buddhists say, and here's what Christians say. Which one do I like? It's not your choice. You don't get to choose reality. God simply is. He establishes the reality. And so what it comes down to is, are you going to take the God that is, or are you going to take a God that you have created? A God that seems to work, a God that takes care of your needs, a God that satisfies your ideas of what God should be. Do you start with yourself, or do you start with God? If you try to climb your way to God, if you try to work your way to God by whatever system you choose, and to be honest, even Christianity can be perverted into a system of climbing to God, trying to reach God by what you do. Anytime you're trying to climb to God, you're going to lose. Proverbs 14:12 says, there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. I really believe this verse illustrates perfectly well the attitude that's so prevalent in our culture today, that it just seems right that all these different ways are all talking about the same God, and they're all going to eventuate in one true God. But as much as it might seem right that we can work our way to God, earn our way into His presence, it simply doesn't work. No one can ever be good enough for God. No one can ever achieve the standard that is His standard. He's holy. He's God. He's not part of us. He's not part of the system. He doesn't play by our rules, and we can't make Him part of the system. So Proverbs 14:12 is a great challenge to us, that there's a way that seems right, but it ends in death. So we have a kind of an option before us. A God of our own creation, the God that Feuerbach so derisively attacked, the God that I've created, who fits my agenda, or the God that is the reality. You can have the God who has created you, who simply establishes the rules, and you're simply receiving what He gives, or the God that you want to be out there because He fits your agenda, He fits your rules. It seems harsh to think that not all religions lead to God. And it's tempting to think that, no, it must be true that all of these religions are really going the same way. But in fact, they're not all saying the same thing. They're not all pointing to the same God. So what is it that makes Christianity different? What sets Christianity apart? Why do Christians make the claim that this is the one true religion? Well, there's a big answer to that. And the truth will be more clearly revealed when we talk next time about Jesus Christ. But the difference comes down to this. Are you climbing your way to God and taking God on your terms, or are you receiving what God gives on his terms as he has established the way? And what makes Christianity different from all the other religions is so remarkable that it deserves an entire session all its own. And that will be next time's discussion.